there's a painful truth most people never realize about love. Sometimes the person pulling away from you, the person confusing you, the person making you question your worth is not doing it because they don't feel anything. They're doing it because they feel too much and they don't know how to handle it. That's the game an avoidant plays in love. And if you don't understand the rules of that game, you lose yourself trying to win someone who is emotionally running the entire time. At first, they come into your life like a storm. Intense attention, deep conversations, strong chemistry. They make you feel chosen. You think, finally? But the moment the connection becomes real, the moment emotions deepen, something changes. They begin to retreat. Not always physically, emotionally. Their texts slow down. Their energy changes. Their warmth disappears without explanation. And suddenly you're sitting there trying to figure out what you did wrong. Listen carefully. Most people think avoidants play games because they're cruel. Number. They play games because intimacy terrifies them. Love demands emotional exposure. It demands trust. It demands consistency. An avenue. Students often learn somewhere in life that closeness equals pain, pressure, or loss of freedom. So what do? They create distance before vulnerability can fully reach them. That's why they pull you close, then push you away. They want connection, but they fear what connection requires. And here's where the dangerous cycle begins. The more distant they become, the harder you chase. You try to prove your value. You become more patient, more understanding, more available. You start over-explaining your love to someone who should already feel it, and without realizing it, you enter their emotional maze. Because avoidants often survive on controlled connection, just enough affection to keep you attached, just enough distance to stay emotionally safe. One day they act deeply loving. The next day they feel emotionally unavailable. And that inconsistency becomes addictive. Why? Because the human brain becomes obsessed with unpredictability. You keep waiting for the good version of them to return. But love should not feel like emotional gambling. Real love should not leave you anxious every night wondering where you stand. Now let's talk about one of the biggest games avoidants play. Silence. Silence after conflict. Silence after intimacy. Silence when emotions become too real. They disappear emotionally because they don't know how to process emotional pressure. But here's the problem. While they are protecting themselves, you are slowly breaking yourself trying to reconnect. You replay conversations in your head. You analyze every text. You blame yourself for their withdrawal. And the more you chase clarity, the more they retreat. Because avoidants often feel overwhelmed when someone needs emotional reassurance from them. So they escape instead of engage. But the deepest game they play is not distance. It's testing. They test your tolerance. How much confusion will you accept? How much inconsistency will you normalize? How long will you abandon your own emotional needs just to keep them comfortable? And many people fail this test because they believe love means endless sacrifice. Number. Love without self-respect becomes emotional imprisonment. The strongest thing you can do with an avoidant is not forcing them to stay. It's refusing to lose yourself while they figure themselves out. That changes everything. Because the moment you stop chasing, the moment you stop over-explaining, the moment you stop begging for basic emotional consistency, the power dynamic shifts. Suddenly they feel your absence. Suddenly they notice the silence. Suddenly the emotional safety net they depended on is gone. And here's what most people never understand. Avoidants often feel your value the strongest when they can no longer control your emotional availability. When you detach with dignity, you force them to confront themselves. Not your begging, not your tears, your absence. But listen carefully. This speech is not about punishing avoidance. It's about waking you up. Because you cannot heal a person by destroying your own peace. You cannot earn healthy love through emotional exhaustion. And you should never have to convince someone to treat your heart carefully. The truth is, some avoidants do heal. Some learn vulnerability. Some learn consistency. But that transformation only happens when they choose growth themselves. Not because you sacrificed your sanity trying to save them. So if you are stuck in this cycle right now, stop asking, how do I make them stop playing games? Ask a more powerful question. Why am I accepting a love that keeps making me a bee? And in myself? Because the moment you value your peace more than their mixed signals, you become free. And freedom is the moment your real power returns. One of the most painful and confusing experiences in love is when someone pulls you incredibly close only to suddenly push you away without warning. This is one of the most common emotional patterns avoidants create in relationships. In the beginning, they can make you feel deeply wanted. They may text constantly, open up emotionally, spend intense time with you, and make you believe the connection is rare and meaningful. You feel chosen. You feel seen. Their attention feels powerful because it often comes with emotional intensity that seems genuine and sincere. But just when you start feeling safe enough to trust the relationship, something shifts inside them. The closer the bond becomes, the more uncomfortable they start to feel. Emotional intimacy begins triggering fear instead of comfort. What once felt exciting now starts feeling threatening to them on a subconscious level. They may not even fully understand why they are changing. All they know is that the relationship suddenly feels heavy, overwhelming, or emotionally demanding. Tai gang. Instead of communicating those fears openly, they begin creating distance. Their energy changes. Their messages become shorter. Their affection becomes inconsistent. The same person who once made you feel like a priority now feels emotionally unavailable. This sudden shift creates emotional confusion inside you. You begin questioning yourself. You replay conversations in your head, trying to identify what went wrong. You wonder if you became too emotional, too available, or too attached. But the truth is, their withdrawal is often less about you and more about their fear of vulnerability. Real intimacy requires emotional exposure. It requires consistency, accountability, and trust. For avoidance, those things can unconsciously feel dangerous because deep down they associate closeness with losing freedom, losing control, or eventually getting hurt. What makes this dynamic so emotionally addictive is the unpredictability. One moment they pull you close again. They become affectionate, loving, and emotionally present. Just when you begin relaxing into the connection, they retreat once more. This emotional hot and cold behavior keeps you trapped in emotional uncertainty. Your mind becomes focused on getting back the version of them that once felt loving and connected. You chase the highs because the lows feel unbearable. Over time, the relationship stops feeling peaceful and starts feeling like emotional survival. The painful part is that many people interpret this cycle as proof that the avoidant secretly loves them deeply. They believe the distance means the avoidant is scared because the feelings are so strong. Sometimes there is truth in that. But strong feelings alone do not create healthy love. Consistency does. Emotional safety does. Communication does. Love cannot survive long-term on confusion and emotional guessing games. As the cycle repeats, you slowly begin abandoning your own emotional needs just to maintain the connection. You become more patient than you should be. You tolerate behaviors that hurt you because you keep hoping the loving version of them will permanently return. You start accepting breadcrumbs of affection as enough. And without realizing it, you begin measuring your worth by how emotionally available they are on any given day. That is why this push and pull dynamic becomes so damaging. It trains you to seek validation from in company. It's onset of consistency instead of stability. Instead of feeling secure in love, you feel anxious, hyper-aware, and emotionally drained. The relationship becomes centered around managing their distance rather than building genuine intimacy together. One of the most emotionally exhausting games an avoidant can play in love is making you chase validation without ever fully giving you emotional security. In the beginning, they often know exactly how to make you feel special. Their attention feels intense, personal, and deeply emotional. They may compliment you in ways nobody else has, make you feel emotionally understood, or create moments of connection that feel unforgettable. Because of this, you naturally begin investing more emotionally into the relationship. You start believing that something real and meaningful is growing between you. But instead of building steady emotional consistency, avoidants often begin giving affection in small, unpredictable doses. One day they are warm, affectionate, and emotionally open. The next day they become distant, distracted, or emotionally unavailable. This inconsistency creates confusion because you never know which version of them you are going to receive. And without realizing it, you slowly begin working harder and harder for emotional reassurance that should come naturally in a healthy relationship. This is where the emotional chase begins. You start analyzing their behavior constantly. If they suddenly become cold, you try to fix the mood. If they pull away, you become more understanding and patient. If they give you a little affection again, you feel relief instead of questioning why the emotional distance happened in the first place. Your emotions slowly become dependent on their approval, attention, and emotional availability. The relationship stops feeling balanced because you are constantly trying to earn stability that should never need to be earned. Avoidants often do not intentionally wake up planning to manipulate people. Many of them are acting from deep emotional fear and discomfort with intimacy. But regardless of intention, the impact can still be painful. They may give just enough affection to keep the connection alive while avoiding the deeper emotional responsibility that real love requires. This creates a cycle where you stay emotionally attached because every small sign of affection feels meaningful. A simple T, 2-second compliment, or a moment of vulnerability suddenly feels huge because emotional consistency has become rare. The human mind becomes addicted to intermittent validation. When affection is unpredictable, you begin craving it more intensely. You start chasing emotional highs instead of seeking emotional peace. Every little sign of warmth feels like proof that the relationship can still work. So you ignore the emotional instability because you become focused on recovering those good moments again. Over time, this dynamic changes your behavior. You may start overthinking everything you say. You become afraid of upsetting them because you fear they will withdraw again. You suppress your own emotional needs to avoid seeming too much. You may even start accepting less respect, less effort, and less communication than you deserve simply because you are emotionally attached to the moments when they do show affection. This is how emotional chasing slowly destroys self-worth. Instead of feeling loved for who you are, you begin feeling valued only when they temporarily choose to give you attention. Your confidence becomes tied to their mood, their responses, and their emotional availability. Tai. And the more you chase validation from someone emotionally inconsistent, the more power you unconsciously hand over to them. Healthy love does not leave you constantly wondering if you are enough. It does not force you to earn affection through patience, sacrifice, or emotional exhaustion. Real love creates emotional safety, not emotional hunger. But when someone trains you to survive on occasional affection instead of genuine consistency, you can mistake emotional starvation for deep connection. One of the most painful things about loving an avoidant is learning that silence can become their most powerful weapon. Instead of expressing emotions directly, instead of explaining what they feel, many avoidants disappear emotionally the moment situations become intense. They shut down, withdraw, or create distance without warning. For the person on the receiving end, this silence feels unbearable because it leaves behind confusion, anxiety, and emotional uncertainty. In the beginning of the relationship, communication may feel easy and natural. They may talk for hours, share personal stories, and make you feel emotionally connected. But the moment conflict appears, vulnerability wounds or emotional expectations increase, something changes. Rather than leaning into communication, they retreat from it. A difficult conversation becomes too overwhelming. Emotional accountability feels too uncomfortable. Instead of talking through problems, they escape them through silence. This silence can appear in many forms. Sometimes they stop replying to messages for hours or days after emotional conversations. Sometimes they become emotionally cold while still physically present. Other times they avoid serious discussions entirely by changing the subject, becoming distracted, or acting like nothing happened. The silence itself becomes a form of control because it forces you into emotional uncertainty while they create distance to feel safe again. For the person who loves them, this creates intense emotional stress. Human beings naturally seek clarity and connection during emotional tension. When someone suddenly withdraws, your mind starts searching for answers. You replay conversations repeatedly. You question your words, your tone, and your behavior. You wonder if you asked for too much, felt too deeply, or became too emotional. Meanwhile, the avoidant often says very little, leaving you trapped inside your own thoughts, trying to solve a problem they refuse to discuss. What makes this even more painful is that silence often creates stronger emotional reactions than direct rejection. When someone clearly communicates their feelings, at least you know where you stand. But silence creates emotional limbo. You do not know if they are angry, overwhelmed, losing interest, or simply avoiding vulnerability. That uncertainty slowly drains your emotional stability because your nervous system stays stuck, waiting for resolution. Avoidants often use silence because they struggle to regulate emotional pressure internally. Intense conversations can make them feel trapped, criticized, or emotionally exposed. Instead of expressing fear or discomfort openly, they distance themselves to regain emotional control. To them, silence feels safer than vulnerability. But while they are protecting themselves emotionally, the other person is left carrying the emotional weight of the relationship alone. Over time, this dynamic changes the entire relationship. You may start becoming afraid to express your feelings because you know it could trigger another withdrawal. You beg, in walking on emotional eggshells, carefully monitoring your words to avoid pushing them away again. Your emotional needs slowly become smaller because you are trying to maintain peace at the cost of honesty. Instead of healthy communication, the relationship becomes built around avoiding their silence. The dangerous part is that prolonged silence can make you emotionally dependent on their return. The moment they finally text back, reappear emotionally, or act affectionate again, you feel relief instead of recognizing how unhealthy the cycle has become. Their return temporarily calms the anxiety their silence created. This strengthens the emotional attachment because your mind begins associating their attention with emotional relief. But real love should never make communication feel like punishment. Healthy relationships are not built on emotional disappearance. They are built on honesty, consistency, and the willingness to face discomfort together instead of running from it. Silence may protect avoidance from vulnerability temporarily, but for the person who loves them, It often creates wounds that grow deeper every time communication disappears. One of the hardest truths to understand about avoidance is that many of them fear vulnerability more than they fear losing the relationship itself. To most people, love feels comforting when emotional closeness grows stronger. But for an avoidant, deep intimacy can trigger fear, pressure, and emotional discomfort. The closer someone gets to them emotionally, the more exposed they begin to feel. What feels like connection to you can feel like loss of control to them. In the beginning, avoidants can appear deeply interested and emotionally invested. They may pursue you intensely, share personal details, and create moments that feel emotionally powerful. During the early stages, the relationship still feels exciting and emotionally manageable because true vulnerability has not fully arrived yet. There is attraction, chemistry, and emotional curiosity, but not necessarily the deep emotional dependence that comes later. Everything feels safe while the relationship remains light enough for them to control emotionally. But as the bond deepens, expectations naturally begin to grow. You start wanting consistency, emotional reassurance, future plans, and deeper connection. This is where avoidants often begin changing. Suddenly, they seem uncomfortable with emotional closeness that once felt natural. They may become distant after intimate conversations, cold after emotional moments, or restless when the relationship starts feeling serious. It can feel confusing because their behavior contradicts the connection they once created so effortlessly. The reason is that vulnerability forces them into emotional territory they do not know how to handle comfortably. Real love requires openness. It requires honesty about fears, insecurities, needs, and emotions. It requires allowing another person to see parts of you that feel unprotected. For avoidance, this level of emotional exposure can feel threatening because somewhere deep inside, they learn that closeness comes with pain, rejection, pressure, disappointment, or loss of independence. Instead of processing those fears directly, many avoidants instinctively create emotional distance. They may focus heavily on your flaws, become emotionally unavailable, or suddenly act uncertain about the relationship. Some convince themselves they need space even when nothing is actually wrong. Others begin emotionally disconnecting right when the relationship becomes healthiest. To the outside person, it feels irrational because everything seemed to be going well. But internally, intimacy itself has started triggering fear. What makes this painful is that avoidants often genuinely care about the person they are pulling away from. Their distance does not always mean their feelings disappeared. In many cases, they are overwhelmed by feelings they do not know how to manage. But instead of moving closer through vulnerability, they move backward into emotional safety. They would rather reduce intimacy than risk feeling emotionally dependent, controlled, or hurt. This creates a heartbreaking cycle for the partner who loves them. You may believe that if you love them harder, stay patient enough, or prove your loyalty strongly enough, they will finally feel safe. So you become more understanding. You tolerate emotional inconsistency. You excuse withdrawal because you know they are struggling internally. But the more emotional closeness you offer, the more pressure avoidance may unconsciously feel. Over time, you begin noticing something painful. They seem more comfortable with distance than with true intimacy. They may miss you when you leave but feel too wrapped when you get too close. They may crave connection but panic when connection becomes emotionally real. This contradiction leaves you emotionally exhausted because you are trying to build stability with someone who fears the very vulnerability required to create it. And that is what makes this dynamic so difficult. Their fear is not always about losing you. Sometimes their deeper fear is what happens if they fully let you in. One of the most emotionally draining games avoidants play in love is testing your worth without ever directly admitting they are doing it. These tests are rarely spoken out loud. They happen through behavior, distance, inconsistency, and emotional pressure. Instead of clearly communicating their fears or needs, avoidants often observe how much uncertainty, silence, and emotional discomfort you are willing to tolerate in order to stay connected to them. And without realizing it, many people slowly lose themselves trying to pass these invisible tests. At first, the relationship may feel exciting and deeply emotional. The connection seems strong, the chemistry feels real, and you believe trust is growing naturally. But as intimacy deepens, the avoidant begin. Enthusiasts creating emotional tension. They may suddenly pull away after becoming close. They may delay communication, act emotionally unavailable, or become distant during moments when the relationship requires deeper emotional commitment. These moments are not always conscious manipulation, but they often function as emotional tests. They watch how you react. Will you chase harder when they withdraw? Will you abandon your own needs to keep the relationship peaceful? Will you continue giving love even when they stop giving the same energy back? This is where many people unknowingly enter a dangerous emotional cycle. Instead of stepping back and questioning the unhealthy dynamic, they work harder to prove their value. They become more patient, more available, more forgiving, and more emotionally accommodating. They believe unconditional love means tolerating confusion and emotional inconsistency. But the more you sacrifice your emotional stability to keep someone comfortable, the more you teach them that your boundaries can be ignored. Avoidants often struggle deeply with trust and vulnerability. Because of this, they may unconsciously test whether someone will stay loyal even when the relationship becomes emotionally difficult. They may create distance to see if you panic. They may withhold affection to see how desperately you seek it. They may become emotionally inconsistent to measure how attached you are to them. These behaviors often come from fear rather than cruelty, but the emotional damage they create is still very real. The painful part is that many people interpret these tests as opportunities to prove their love. They believe that if they stay loyal long enough, patient enough, and understanding enough, the avoidant will finally feel safe enough to fully commit emotionally. So they continue tolerating behaviors that slowly destroy their confidence and emotional peace. They accept breadcrumbs of affection because they hope consistency will eventually return. Over time, the relationship becomes emotionally one-sided. Your focus shifts away from your own emotional well-being and toward managing their fears, moods, and emotional distance. You begin monitoring their energy constantly. If they become cold, you try harder. If they pull away, you become more available. If they return with affection, you feel temporary relief instead of recognizing how unhealthy the cycle has become. What makes these emotional tests so dangerous is that they slowly condition you to ignore your own standards. Behaviors that once felt unacceptable start becoming normalized. Emotional inconsistency begins feeling familiar. You stop asking whether the relationship is healthy for you because you become consumed by the goal of keeping the connection alive. But healthy love does not require endless testing. Real love is not built by constantly proving your worth through suffering, patience, or emotional sacrifice. A healthy relationship allows both people to feel emotionally safe, respected, and valued without needing to survive endless uncertainty first. The moment you stop trying to pass every emotional test is often the moment you begin reclaiming your self-respect. Because your value should never depend on how much pain you are willing to tolerate for someone else's unresolved fears. The moment you stop chasing an avoidant, everything inside the relationship begins to change. For so long, the emotional dynamic may have revolved around you trying to hold the connection together. You were the one initiating conversations, seeking clarity, fixing emotional distance, and fighting for consistency. Every time they pulled away, you moved closer. Every time they became silent, you tried harder to reconnect. Without realizing it, your energy became the emotional fuel keeping the entire cycle alive. Avoidants often become comfortable in relationships where they control the emotional distance. They know that no matter how inconsistent they become, the other person will continue chasing reassurance and trying to repair the connection. This creates an unhealthy imbalance where one person constantly pursues while the other constantly withdraws. The more you chase, the safer they feel maintaining distance because they never truly experience the emotional consequences of losing access to you. But the moment you stop chasing, the emotional pattern breaks. Suddenly, your energy changes. You stop begging for attention. You stop over-explaining your feelings. You stop trying to force emotional closeness with someone who keeps resisting it. Instead of constantly reacting to their distance, you begin focusing on your own peace, your own self-respect, and your own emotional stability. And that shift becomes powerful because avoidants often expect emotional pull. This is our suit to continue indefinitely. When you emotionally detach with dignity, something unexpected happens. The avoidant no longer feels fully in control of the connection. The emotional safety net they relied on begins disappearing. Your silence feels different because it is no longer filled with anxiety, desperation, or attempts to pull them back closer. It carries emotional independence. And emotional independence can deeply affect avoidants because they often feel safest when they know someone will always remain emotionally available to them, no matter how distant they become. For the first time, they are forced to sit with the emotional space they helped create. They notice your absence more clearly because the emotional pressure you once placed on yourself has disappeared. The constant reassurance, attention, and emotional effort you gave them is no longer there. And sometimes that is the exact moment they begin realizing your true value. Many people make the mistake of believing they can convince an avoidant to love them more by chasing harder. But emotional pursuit often creates the opposite effect. The more pressure avoidants feel, the more they retreat into emotional distance, protect themselves. When you stop chasing, however, you remove the emotional pressure while also removing unlimited access to your energy. This creates a completely different emotional experience for them. Now they are the ones wondering what changed. They begin noticing your emotional absence in ways they ignored when you were constantly available. They may suddenly reach out more, become curious, or attempt reconnecting emotionally. Not because manipulation worked, but because your withdrawal forced them to confront the reality of potentially losing someone who truly cared. But the most important transformation is not what happens inside them. It is what happens inside you. You begin remembering your worth outside the relationship. Your emotions stop revolving around their moods, silence, and inconsistency. You stop waking up every day, wondering how to make someone choose you. Instead, you begin choosing yourself. And that changes your entire emotional state because self-respect restores clarity. You realize that healthy love should never require exhausting pursuit. It should not demand that one person constantly abandon their own needs to maintain connection. The moment you stop chasing, you finally see the relationship clearly instead of emotionally surviving inside it. And whether the avoidant comes back or not, your power returns because your happiness no longer depends on someone else's emotional availability. In the end, the games an avoidant plays in love are not just about mixed signals, emotional distance, or confusing behavior. They are about fear. Fear of vulnerability, fear of losing control, fear of being fully seen emotionally. And while those fears may explain their behavior, they do not erase the emotional damage those behaviors can create inside someone who genuinely loves them. Many people enter these relationships believing patience alone will heal the connection. They believe that if they love harder, stay longer, and sacrifice more, eventually the avoidant will finally become emotionally safe and available. But love was never meant to become a constant battle for reassurance. Real love should not leave you emotionally starving while you wait for consistency that rarely comes. The painful truth is that avoidants often create emotional cycles that keep people trapped between hope and heartbreak. One moment you feel deeply loved and the next moment you feel invisible. That emotional instability slowly changes you. It makes you question your worth, silence your needs, and tolerate behaviors you once promised yourself you would never accept. Over time, you stop focusing on whether the relationship is healthy and start focusing only on how to keep the connection alive. And that is where many people lose themselves completely. They become emotionally addicted to temporary affection instead of building relationships rooted in peace, trust, and emotional safety. But the biggest lesson in all of this is not about understanding avoidance. It is about understanding yourself. It is about recognizing the moment you started abandoning your own emotional well-being just to maintain someone else's comfort. Because no matter how deeply you love someone, you cannot build a healthy relationship alone. You cannot heal another person by sacrificing your own peace. And you should never have to shrink your emotions, lower your standards, or silence your pain just to avoid being abandoned. The strongest thing you can do is stop measuring your value by someone else's emotional availability and start remembering the worth you had before, regarding the confusion ever began. And the moment you finally stop chasing, stop begging, and stop trying to force connection where consistency does not exist, something powerful happens inside you. You begin reclaiming your identity. Your emotions become stable again because they are no longer controlled by someone else's distance. You stop waiting for messages that may never come. You stop replaying conversations in your mind every night. You stop treating emotional inconsistency like proof of deep love. Instead, you begin understanding that healthy love feels calm, safe, open, and mutual. It does not require emotional survival skills just to feel connected. And once you experience that clarity, you never see unhealthy attachment the same way again. So if you are listening to this while loving an avoidant, remember this deeply. Your heart deserves more than confusion. Your love deserves reciprocity. Your loyalty deserves consistency. And your peace deserves protection. Whether the avoidant changes or not is no longer the most important question. The real question is whether you are finally ready to choose yourself instead of losing yourself in someone else's emotional fears. Because that moment you stop chasing painful love and start valuing your own emotional peace, that is the moment your real healing begins. Thank you so much for listening to this speech. I truly hope these words helped you see your situation more clearly and reminded you of your own worth. If this message touched your heart, stay connected, keep growing, and never forget that the right love will never force you to betray yourself just to keep it alive. Take care of your heart, protect your peace, and keep moving forward with strength. Goodbye, and I'll see you in the next speech.